name is Zach Price. A little bit about me, I'm originally from the United States. I've been overseas for 21 years, the first 10 years in Southern Africa, where I met my wife, and the last 11 years here in Chiang Mai. My first job here in Chiang Mai, actually, do I get a pointer? My first job here in Chiang Mai was with ECHO, Ecological Concerns for the Hunger Organization, a Christian agriculture outreach that we've installed lots of these water filtration systems. Actually, I lived for Zambia many years, and my primary water source was that exact system. And the only time it ever gave us problems was when we cleaned it too well. Because the microorganisms inside are actually what's eating the bad bacteria and filtering the water. It's a fantastic system, so well done to you guys for doing that. What I hope to do today, I've been here for 11 years, worked with ECHO, was a farm consultant for many years, and in COVID I had to make a shift, and I joined, at that stage I was consulting with Bella Goose Coffee, and during that time they invited me into the business to help them start their roastery. At that stage they were just a cafe. They were buying all their roasted coffee from outside, selling it. They asked me to join them to help start their roastery and to help start an education arm. So our downtown location, right down the street, 4 stories up, we have a coffee lab, an education lab. This morning, I'm actually taking a break. I have a class there this morning. I'm hosting 6 people from the 7-Eleven headquarters in Manila, Philippines. So they're all doing a sensory class. And the thing I talked about this morning was the memory and learning part of the brain, and how transduction happens when you smell an aroma compound that touches your olfactory system and communicates to the learning part of your brain. So I was really fascinated this morning with the presentation. So what I'd like to do is, I have a number of slides, maybe a little bit ambitious for this short time, and I want to leave time for questions because it's obvious you guys have a lot of questions. I'm going to go through really quickly, just kind of painting a picture of what coffee actually is. So coffee is a fruit. Here you see a diagram of a coffee cherry. Yes?
Would you mind not stepping in front of the screen?
Okay, I was told for the camera to be, if I'm here, how do I look on the camera?
That's good.
Can everybody see the screen now? Thank you for saying something. Coffee is a fruit. Normally, there's 2 seeds in every cherry, what we call a cherry fruit. These 2 seeds are what you're actually drinking. So we harvest the seeds, we roast them, and we grind them and we brew them, and that's what you're drinking when you drink coffee. So there's an up and a down. Oh, there we go. There are 2 major species of coffee that are grown commercially in the world. About 60% of world production is what we call arabica coffee. Arabica coffee is known for having a higher tasting experience. In other words, it tastes better than its counterpart Robusta. Arabica coffee, which I will see in a later slide, grows at higher elevation. Thailand's Robusta production all happens in southern Thailand, close to the beach. All their Arabica production happens predominantly in Chiang Mai, Chiang Rai, and Nan province. Wrong way, there we go. You'll see some other species listed up here. Liberica would be one, Excelsia. These are more, you might find them in the odd place in the world, but they're not commercially grown. Coffee, actually all coffee comes from southern Sudan, Ethiopia region, especially Arabica coffee. Robusta coffee would be more across the belt, getting into Central Africa and West Africa, but every single coffee plant that we grow here in Thailand comes from a heritage that started in Africa. This is what we call the coffee cradle. We have something, coffee is a tropical, subtropical plant. It's an evergreen, but it cannot freeze. So it does not grow well above 20 degrees north or below 20 degrees south. Traditionally, places like Thailand and southern China would not be considered optimal regions for growing because it gets too cold. If there's frost, our trees can die. You'll find though that the Thailand, Laos, southern China are some of the largest growing. The other parts of the world have already been developed, and these are the largest growing production development happening in the world right now. Brazil, when you combine arabica and robusta production and you put them together, Brazil is the #1 producer in the world. They are at risk. They're just outside of that, what we call the coffee belt. And because they're one of the largest producers in the world, you'll find that whatever happens in Brazil happens in the rest of the world. So the prices of coffee worldwide over the last 2 to 3 years, this year they've stabilized a little bit, but the previous 2 to 3 years, they've skyrocketed worldwide, and it was all because of drought in Brazil. So just quickly, I'll actually take you through some future slides explaining each one of these things, but when you go from the seed, which is in the coffee cherry, all the way to the cup, it's not just the barista brewing their coffee that's interacting with this seed. There is tons of people that have touched this actual coffee bean that you're working with. So here I have planting, that's the farmer. I have harvesting. Depending on the country, that could be migrant harvesting. Sometimes it'll be done locally, sometimes it'll be done by migrant work. In places like Brazil, it's done with machines. Processing is how we remove the seeds out of the cherry. There's a lot of different processing methods. There's fermentation involved in order to clean them. There's drying conditioning. There's milling them, that's removing all the husk off of them. There's transporting them to port, shipping them internationally. There's roasting them. There is trained taste evaluators putting value on them. There's grinding, and then there's brewing. Some examples of farms worldwide. You have what we call a rustic farm, which would be traditional forest type setting. You have traditional polyculture, which is traditional forest, but there's been a little bit more concentrated effort into what trees are growing. Maybe some of them are more than one species introduced in the forest, or cash crops. You get commercial polyculture. This might be a completely unforested area that has been reforested with specific trees for cash crops and shade. Shade monoculture. You're seeing a lot of this in Laos right now. A lot of the big money in Thailand is buying up farms in Laos. Areas that have been completely deforested, or on the southern plateau, the Balaban Plateau, there's large areas where they're going in and planting coffee trees and then a monoculture shade tree on top. And then you get no shade sun coffee. So this would be common in places like Brazil. Quality-wise, there's a lot of, anytime you ask a question about coffee and quality, it depends. Is this the one thing, the way it's grown on the farm, is this the one thing that gives us quality? It depends. There's a lot of different factors that put it all together. I will say the majority of coffee producers in northern Thailand are actually not landowners. They're occupying national parks. And they're able to occupy these national parks under the agreement that they won't destroy forest and that they'll contribute to the forest, and they can grow their own cash crops with that. What that means is that mostly we're looking at rustic farms. These rustic farms add quality because shade provides nice, cool nighttime temperatures, which slow down the metabolism of the coffee cherry and add complexity of flavor. The forest also has biodiversity. The presence of birds greatly impacts the health of a coffee tree because the birds are predators for the insects that normally would eat the coffee tree. So some risks for coffee farmers are disease, pests. Coffee leaf rust is a fungus. Coffee berry borer beetle is an insect. Frost is a problem. It's my understanding that frost impacted Thailand about 15 years ago, but they lost a large portion of their coffee production because of it, but since then, it's been smooth sailing. Drought, wind. Robusta is known for having shallow root systems, so coffee grown in southern Thailand with strong winds, it can be uprooted. Natural disaster and economic instability. An example of economic instability impacting the coffee industry would be a place like Yemen. Yemen is known for having some of the best, most complex coffees in the world, yet it's almost impossible to get coffee out of Yemen. For those that love to read, there's an excellent book on Yemen called The Monk of Mocha. I highly recommend it. When it comes to the quality of the cup that you're receiving, so we have the tree, we have the quality. We said arabica is better than robusta, it tastes better, but with arabica there's different varietals. So there is, different, there's one of the most famous varietals worldwide would be something called geisha. One of the varietals most common worldwide, which is what we're growing in Thailand, is called Catamore. So this can impact the flavor, but then next to that, one of the greatest impacts of quality would be how well it's harvested. So machine harvesting would be what we call strip picking. So a coffee tree ripens over several months. The closer to the equator, a coffee tree can take as long as 10 months to ripen. So over a branch, you have many cherries, and along the equator of these 100 cherries on this branch, they will take a time frame of 10 months to individually ripen. In Thailand, because we're further from the equator, we have more distinguished seasons. We have a shorter harvesting season. We're looking at plus or minus 3 months. So what happens is, if a harvester is trained well and they are patient, they can identify the right cherries and go up to a particular tree and only remove the right cherries. These produce the best coffees. If they're impatient, they might just say, oh, I'm getting paid the same for whatever cherry it is, and they might harvest immature or over-ripened cherries together with the ripe cherries. Immature cherries are greener in color, higher in chlorogenic acid, which is very bitter, lower in natural sugars, which takes away sweetness. You may not notice it, but for the trained eye, it's extremely easy to pick out immature versus mature coffee. So cherry ripeness is one of the most important things when we choose what picking. Then we get, once we harvest them, we then have to process them. Then you get to what we call the most complex part of the supply chain. So in processing, we have 3 main processing methods. You'll see these processing categories on the bottom of the screen. This is natural. Pulped natural would be the second category, and washed would be the last. Now, traditionally in Ethiopia, all coffees were processed naturally. What does that mean? It just means they harvested these cherries, they laid the cherries in the sun, and they let them dry until they were fully dry. And when they were fully dry, they milled them and removed all the crusty, dry skin off. They then later developed a process, the last process you see here called wash process, that essentially cleaned the seed. It removed the seed out of the cherry while it was still fresh. They fermented it in water in order to break up all the sugars and the mucilage stuck to the seed so that they could clean it well and then dry it. So it dried quicker. You needed less land space available to do it, and you could identify a lot of the defective beans easier when they were outside of the cherry. So they did this to increase quality. It became the industry standard worldwide wash process coffee. Now, within the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a big move in coffee to go back to the naturals, but to do it in a way where you were sure you weren't going to get the defects. To make sure, because you couldn't identify the defects inside of the cherry. So then they put a lot of effort into training how they harvested them, how they dried them, and they called those high-value naturals. And this is a lot of what you're seeing in a cafe in Chiang Mai when you go around and you'll see people offer these special natural processed coffees that are twice as the money, they cost twice as much as the washed. They're actually in some ways easier to make, less machinery to make it, but the attention to detail is much, much, much higher in order to do it well. The pulp natural in the middle is somewhere where they pulp it, they remove the seed out of the cherry, but they don't wash it clean. They just stick it out to dry with all the sugars and mucilage stuck to it. It gets really sticky as it dries. This process was developed in Mexico, and when they then started importing these beans into the US, they realized they can take the Spanish word for syrup, and either translate it as syrup or translate it as honey. So they started calling these pulp naturals honey processed. So if you go into a cafe and you see, oh, honey processed coffee, there's no honey in it. Honey was never used in it. It just kind of got syrupy and sticky as they were processing it. If you're a wine drinker, you could connect the flavor notes of a natural process to a red wine, a wash process to a white wine, and a honey process to a rosé. I'll skip this slide because it's just going through each one of the processes. So here's just some examples of the fermentation tanks. This is what the seeds look like after they're removed from the cherries. They're put into tanks. They're soaked in water 12 to 24 hours. After 12 to 24 hours, you can just agitate them and wash them clean, spray them down, or you can use machinery to actually scrub them. That's what this machine is. This is what the machine looks like that removes them from the cherry. It's called a pulper. This is what drying looks like. Patio drying on the left is when we just dry it on the ground. African raised beds are a simple technology where airflow can come from underneath the beans. They can dry at a much faster rate. And then at the top right, you'll see mechanical drying. Now, mechanical drying can add a lot of efficiency in large productions, which might be a benefit financially for the company. However, it usually decreases quality. This is a coffee holder, so we dry coffee down to 10 to 12% moisture. You can connect coffee storage would be, it would be similar to storing a seed. So when we store coffee, we store it the same way we would store a seed, in the sense that if a coffee's too dry, the seedling or the embryo of the seed dies, and therefore all the carbohydrates and acids that are giving the coffee flavor will then die. If the seed is too wet, the embryo thinks it's supposed to grow into a tree and it will start eating up all the sugars. So in order to have a high quality coffee, you have to have coffee that's been stored at the correct drying. It's been dried correctly and it's been stored correctly. This is a machine, this is a handheld machine you might see in Thailand. They have larger ones that are called hullers. They usually dry them inside of the parchment and wait for them to be less than 13%. Then they hull them, which is removing the parchment, bag them, and then ship them internationally, or in our case, from the village down into Chiang Mai. Oh, lastly, we have different types of sorting. So the honest truth is that every farm has the potential to grow all different grades. So very similar to like high value, like fruit export. If a farmer is harvesting his fruit, he will be grading it as he harvests it, and he will be portioning it out. There may be some fruit that didn't do as well. It gets sent to the canning factory. Other fruit that looks less blemishes, it gets put on the boat to go to Europe. Coffee, every farm, their greatest ability to succeed would be their ability to be able to sort the coffee. So they will, every farm will have low quality and high quality. Now, if farmers are growing coffee well, they're giving the coffee trees the nutrients they need, they're harvesting well, they're going to have less defect coffee than maybe they would if they didn't do all those things. But the key element is sorting. So one of the major ways to sort coffee that has one of the greatest impacts as far as flavor goes is gravity separation. There's a table called a machine called an Oliver table, which is a tilted table that vibrates, and it sends all the low density beans to the top, all the high density beans to the bottom. The ones at the bottom come out tasting a lot better than the ones at the top. Hand sorting is one of the most common, to this day, in the last 5 years, we're seeing optical sorting machines come out at a lower price, and they're becoming more accessible to producing countries. I think there's guys here in town, coffee roasters, that have machines. They're out of China that are costing roughly 400,000 baht. It's the same exact technology that's used for cherry tomatoes. They're able to optically sort the machine, so the coffee seeds will fall over a waterfall, be examined for color, be programmed for a variation of green, which is acceptable or unacceptable, and then jets of air will push out unacceptable colors of green. This has an impact on the overall quality of a crop. However, it doesn't have the same impact as an Oliver table. Density is a much better way to evaluate quality than color. Hand sorting is still the industry standard worldwide, and visually they'll see beans that have insect. Maybe there's insect damage, maybe there's discoloration, maybe there's chipping. All of these things mean that the seed is not healthy and probably not going to produce the best flavor. So we might ask ourselves, what is specialty coffee? Specialty coffee is a term being used worldwide right now for a lot of different reasons. Like, you'll hear people talk about, oh, that's a specialty coffee shop. One of the most famous coffee shops in Chiang Mai, worldwide anyway, is Ristretto, because the owner of Ristretto won an international competition he won the World Barista Championship in 2017. So you might think, oh, he's specialty coffee because he's an award-winning barista. It's a fantastic experience to go and drink coffee there. Specialty might mean the way it was designed. You go in these new cafes, they're chic, they're minimal, they look like they could be on the front cover of a design magazine. We might call that specialty. Or you might get these interesting drinks like, oh, this one was fermented a very unique way. It was anaerobic fermentation. They added wine yeast in while they were fermenting it. That might be specialty coffee. All these things are true. It's a big category, but essentially, if you see the word specialty used on coffee, it should mean that it's without defect. And the coffee industry has a grading system that basically counts defects, and if there is a low number of defects, it can be called specialty. If there's a small amount, not specialty, but just a few smaller amounts, they call it premium. And then they have commodity coffee, which could be full of defects. And then lastly, we grade by size. Some countries value size, like African countries would put a higher price tag on a larger size. Other countries, they may not do that. There is a correlation. If I compare a large bean in Africa to a medium-sized bean in Guatemala, we can't compare them based on size because all the other variables are too unique. However, if we were working at a farm in Thailand and this farm was producing a large size and a medium size, we are probably, not always, but most likely going to be able to taste the flavor difference between the size. So you'll see a lot of times if you're you may not see it as a consumer at the cafe, but if you were working in the cafe and you saw the green unroasted coffee come in, you'll see it's been graded with the size. As coffee roasters, the main thing we want to know is that has it been graded for size, because when I roast it, I don't want to be roasting small little beans together with big beans. I'd rather roast all the small beans together and get a consistent roast, and all the large beans together to get a consistent roast. Lastly, I'm going to end with this. This is just an idea. You see a lot of different certifications floating around. I will say that Thailand, thank you, Thailand is mostly direct trade. So it's from the farm straight to me. It's not having to go through any governing body. It's not having to go through an agriculture department because it's being exported. So a lot of times it's just a matter of a handshake, and we don't care. When I buy coffee, I just care about the flavor. I don't care about the certification. When you buy internationally though, you'll find that there are lots of third-party certifications. Some of them would have environmental criterias. Some of them would have social criterias, and some of them would have economic criterias. So an example, organic certifications usually mean no fertilizer and some sort of environmental criteria. Fair trade would not care at all about that. They're only caring about a social criteria and an economic criteria. Rainforest Alliance has a little bit of environment and a little bit of social. So you can look up, I've run out of time, unfortunately. You can look up these and kind of know what you're looking for, but most likely when you're buying in Thailand, you're not going to see any of these, unless maybe you're buying off the shelf at Rimpine, then they would have gone through a different supply chain than the average coffee shop. Anyway, thank you. I wanted to finish a few minutes early for questions, but unfortunately, thank you so much for giving me the time to share. It was really privileged to be here.